Welcome back, everybody, to our summer deep dive series where we are breaking down every team in the NFL, going in order of my power rankings leading into the season. And today, we reveal the 21st ranked Green Bay Packers, the lowest that this team has ranked since I've been doing this series. Obviously, with Aaron Rodgers leaving, there's some change afoot with this team. Going to be a very fascinating year for the Green Bay Packers and a very fascinating deep dive ahead. Before we do get started, if you could do me a huge favor and please just take a second to hit that like button. It's a free and easy way that really supports my channel. It tells YouTube that you enjoy the content and to push it out to other NFL fans just like you. And do consider subscribing if you enjoy the deep dives. You won't miss any of them as we go. You can help me on this journey to get to 100,000 subscribers, which is a big goal of mine this year. I really appreciate it. But without further ado, let's get into it. As always, starting by taking a look at this team's key departures and additions from this offseason. And it's a pretty shallow list on both sides here for Green Bay, which is certainly not a unfamiliar sight for Packers fans. This is a team that likes to keep things pretty close to home, and it was more of that here. So they do have some losses. Obviously, Aaron Rodgers heading to the Jets. Anytime you move off of a Hall of Fame quarterback, it's going to be all eyes on the next guy to see what that room can look like. But they are really shaking up this receiving room where they're going to let 4 starters or quasi-starters leave from last season. You know, Randall Cobb played 371 snaps for this team. That's about 5 or 6 games worth. And can make some plays and was a good presence in the locker room, but they're hoping second-round pick Jaden Reed and some of these other wide receivers can step up. I think that's reasonable. Along with losing Allen Lazard, who I honestly think is going to be a little bit of addition by subtraction for this Packers team. I think one of the smarter things they did this offseason was not paying him what the Jets paid him. I think Allen Lazard is useful for his blocking, which is like the 9th most important thing that you should look for in a wide receiver. I think in certain schemes that is a useful trait. And in the Jets case, where he's going to be their 4th best receiving target, I think that's fine. But in Green Bay, where he had to be their number 1 wide receiver last year, like it was a joke. He's a slow, big-bodied receiver that doesn't use his frame to his best advantage. I think they overused him because Rodgers liked him and Gutekunst didn't give them a whole lot of other options. So I think with a lot of the young pieces, this is a loss on paper that I'm just not that worried about for this Packers team. And then they're letting Mercedes Lewis go as well, who did play a key role as that big-bodied blocker, but plenty of times last year it was like he's running a route down the field, and it's like, my God, that is an offensive tackle trying to run a route. So definitely adding some speed to that tight end room with those 451 snaps. And then the other tight end, Robert Tonyan, didn't really continue to build upon his undrafted free agent success last year. He heads to Chicago, and Green Bay, I think, is hoping that their investments through the draft are going to be upgrades to those pair of tight ends leaving. Definitely more to discuss there once we get to the roster portion of the video. Then on the defensive side of the ball, they are going to lose Dean Lowry and Jaron Reed, who ate up about a full player's worth of snaps there, rotating on the interior. Fine veterans that are useful bodies that are no longer here, though not impactful players. Adrian Amos as well was not himself last year, was really nowhere to be found in coverage at all. In fact, he blew more assignments than he did make plays on balls. But still a presence in the run defense and a reliable starter that they're going to be missing this year. I think as far as asking, did they get better, other than quarterback, of course, I think safety is going to be the one spot you look at there. Along with kicker, Mason Crosby is still out there on the free agent market. He's been okay the last couple of years. They're looking to get younger at that kicker spot. We'll see how that kind of plays out. I wouldn't be stunned if they bring Mason Crosby back. But they also lose Chris Barnes to the Arizona Cardinals. Was a nice backup linebacker for them to round out the players leaving Green Bay. And then as far as their additions are concerned, It was pretty much all through the draft. No free agent activity really at all for the most part for Green Bay, outside of bringing in Jonathan Owens and Tavarius Moore to compete for that safety room. Neither are necessarily even locks to make the team, but other than that, it's all the draft. So they bring in a bunch of playmakers on day 2 of the draft. Jaden Reed, Luke Musgrave, Tucker Kraft, a really explosive complementary group that I'm excited to see grow with Jordan Love here. And then, of course, Lucas Van Ness, big-bodied power rusher that I really liked out of Iowa, is going to be a good fit to continue to improve this defensive line. They now got 4 first-round picks on that defensive line now. Also got to note Anders Carlson, even though he's a 6th-round pick, he is the only kicker on the roster right now, and that could have a big impact on this team's season depending on what he looks like. But then some smaller additions through the draft as well. Colby Wooden as a kind of hybrid defensive end on round 4. And then one of my favorite 7th-round picks of the entire draft, Anthony Johnson Jr. out of Iowa State, who I think will also be competing year 1 in that safety room, along with 5 other day 3 selections, plus Sean Clifford, that for some reason this team felt like was a draftable prospect. Can't really explain that one. But that does round out their additions and subtractions. As we take a look at the positional movement chart, definitely some pros and cons for how they went about this offseason. I see 3 positions upgraded, being wide receiver, offensive line, and edge. At wide receiver, yes, they lost Alan Lazard, but I do feel like there's a little bit of addition by subtraction there, getting more explosive at this position group. But even if you disagree with that, Romeo Doubs only got through about 7 games last year, Christian Watson about 10. It's basically a whole nother receiver if those guys are healthy, which right now it seems they are, and you add Jaden Reed. So I do see it as a better, more explosive group of wide receivers. Offensive line, I have to consider as an upgrade, considering David Bakhtiari and Elton Jenkins were not available for this team to start last season, but both are good to go right now. And then on the edge, obviously adding Lucas Van Ness is an upgrade. I have one position that could go either way, and that is tight end. Rookie tight ends are always a little bit unpredictable, but I do like what they did there, but they have some veteran guys to replace. We'll see how that goes. And then 3 positions to me on paper look like downgrades. Obviously, quarterback, pretty self-explanatory. You move off of Aaron Rodgers, you're not expecting to upgrade there. Safety, while Amos had a down year, it's still a large question mark for this team, considering they didn't address it in any large way. And then kicker. They have a 6th-round kicker that I think was hurt at the end of the year, currently to replace Mason Crosby. On paper, looks like a downgrade. Everything else is neutral. The one people might disagree with is going to be interior defensive line. They lost Dean Lowry and Jerron Reed, but I think this stubborn staff was keeping Devontae Wyatt off the field because of those veterans' presence. And I think at worst, that's going to be a push where Devontae Wyatt looked much better than those guys when he played as a 1st-round pick. I'm expecting at least neutral there. And unfortunately for Packers fans, neutral at coaching as well, where this team, for some godforsaken reason, did not fire Joe Barry. But let's talk about that. Let's talk about the coaching staff here, how they rank against the rest of the league, and a little bit of a scheme analysis of what we're going to see X's and O's wise from the Packers this year. So Matt LaFleur at the top as the head coach. He ranked as a top 10 head coach for me last year. I don't know the exact number. I think either 7 or 8, and not going to rank as a top 10 head coach this year. Now, I still have a ton of respect for his play calling, his play design ability. I think he's a very good offensive mind and an asset for this team. But that said, there's been a rising number of confusing coach decisions from Matt LaFleur that have definitely started to raise some red flags for me. It goes back to 2021, where they retained the special teams coordinator that everybody knew was an issue. It ended up costing them potentially a Super Bowl, as they lost to that Niners team off of special teams, really. But also just a lot of high-profile personnel and team player usage decisions that have really raised a lot of red flags for me, whether that's decision making on who's starting on the offensive line, like trotting out Royce Newman for no good reason, using Alan Lazard on a critical fourth down jet sweep in a must-win game against Detroit, not using Aaron Jones as much as they could. Other questions about offensive line decisions, including things with Zach Tom and Yosh Nijman, and that goes back to 2021. Like, there's been a lot of frustrating personnel decisions from Matt LaFleur, and then, of course, none worse than deciding to keep Joe Barry on staff, who we're going to talk about, but that's possibly the most questionable, I guess, roster or staffing decision that any team made around the league this year. So to me, there are some red flags that, okay, we know he's a good offensive mind. I don't know if we think he's a great offensive mind, but he's certainly a good one. But we're starting to get some red flags about, is he a guy that is cutthroat enough to be an NFL head coach? Is he too attached to some of these people? And I get it. He's a great dude, and he's got friends, and he doesn't want to fire his friends, but tough shit. Like, you got to make tough decisions if you want to be great in the NFL, and I don't know if he is able to act on those. So he has a lot to prove in that department. Now, I still think he's proved a lot. I still think the overall coach and culture in Green Bay is still something that deserves a good ranking. Like, Green Bay is known for their culture, and they have earned a lot of benefit of the doubt over the years. And there's still been a lot of really impressive player development stuff in the Matt LaFleur era. So it's certainly not all bad, but there's some weak spots in there as well. As far as the scheme is concerned, he runs the Shanahan system. It's going to be wide zone with a healthy mix of counters on top of that. And then, of course, the threat of those run schemes to set up play action shots with a lot of crossing routes, deep posts, very much your typical Kyle Shanahan offense that I feel is very well documented at this point. And I wouldn't expect any change off of that. And then he's got Adam Stenavich as his right-hand man. Stenavich also comes from the Kyle Shanahan background. So we know what these guys know, and we know what they want to do. It's the Shanahan offense. There's no other influences coming in here trying to run various other schemes. They're going to do their thing here. And then, unfortunately, they're going to do their thing here on defense as they retain Joe Barry, who is standing alone in the bottom tier of defensive coaching. I mean, there were a couple other defensive coaches that I documented in one of my favorite videos I've ever made about Vic Fangio-style defensive coordinators really struggling around the league as the league is going to a lot of these kind of off-zone, quarters-heavy systems. And in that video, I really highlighted a lot of coordinators and some of their issues, but really focused on Joe Barry, Ed Donatel in Minnesota, and Joe Woods in Cleveland. And I talked about how there are strengths to running off-zone quarters when you're facing aggressive quarterbacks that don't want to take the underneath stuff, that want to headhunt, or in certain situations or game scripts where you're up big and you can allow easy stuff underneath. But you also have to know when and how to actually play defense when it's 3rd and 3, whether that's putting your guys in the right run fits up front and making sure you have every gap accounted for, or drawing up good blitzes that can manufacture free rushers and confuse offensive lines, or hell, oh my God, Joe Barry, I know it's crazy to say this, but play press coverage. I mean, don't allow free releases on slants and stick routes to just convert 3rd and 3 willy-nilly. Another wild Joe Barry stat, too, is that even after Rashawn Gary got hurt, the Packers were only 2nd in the NFL in the amount of stunts that they ran, not getting creative to manufacture a pass rush, just being stubborn to say we can win with 4 when that just wasn't the case after Gary went down. And you can run the Fangio-style scheme, but as Vic Fangio has shown us, 2021, Denver Broncos ran more cover 1 press man coverage than anybody in the league. You still situationally have to coach your defense. You can't just play off-zone coverage all the time. And those other 2 coordinators that were doing just as bad of a job as Joe Barry, surprise, surprise, they were fired because they were horrible at scheming up their defenses. And Joe Barry, this is a trend at this point. He's been bad at every stop that he's been at, whether that was Detroit or Washington. It's been no different here, and I just am speechless that they did not fire him. Although, unfortunately, I'm not surprised because this is an organization that is stubborn and old school and afraid of change. And this is another example of that mentality likely holding this team back, especially in an offseason where Vic Fangio was available. Ejiro Evero was available. Brian Flores was available. There were even more guys. Steve Wilkes, who goes to San Francisco. Vance Joseph. So many other defensive coordinators that have shown that they can actually do a good job. And they stick with Joe Barry. It's unbelievable. And honestly, I think it's the biggest question mark for this entire team is, can he wake up for the first time in his career? I think there were minor flashes of that as the year went on, as countless people began to ask what the hell he's doing. He kind of threw some other shit at the wall to see what stuck, and there was a little bit more blitzing, a little bit more man coverage. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. But even then, I don't remember a defense that so consistently would send 6 guys after the quarterback and every single rusher would just get stonewalled as if they knew exactly where the rush was coming from. Like, disguise and scheming up open rushers is another part of the job, and he's horrible at that. Even though he learned from Wade Phillips with the Rams, who's great at that. I don't get it. He just, to me, is not a good defensive coordinator. I think he's the worst in the league and is going to actively hold this defense back again, even though they've invested so much on that side of the ball and continue to do so with Lucas Van Ness. So definitely frustrating there. Again, going to rank dead last in the NFL for defensive coaching, and I don't even know how you argue otherwise. If Minnesota and Cleveland had stuck by their guys, sure, but they didn't. They saw what was going on and made a change. And now Brian Flores is going to be coaching the other guys in Minnesota. So good job, Green Bay. Really nailed that one. So we'll see how that goes. Certainly going to be some more Joe Barry claps as we progress through this video. And certainly an interesting coaching staff to look at there, because it's not all bad, right? But definitely not all good. Now, before we get into the roster breakdown, I want to thank our sponsors of the series, Underdog Fantasy. I'm sure you guys have heard about their daily Pick'em contest where you can string together lineups, selecting player stats, and getting payouts up to 20 to 1. I just hit one on an MLB game, $5 entry to win 100. That was a ton of fun, but they also have Best Ball, which is my new favorite thing. Every year I sit around all summer waiting to draft a few fantasy teams because the draft to me is the most fun part of fantasy football, and Best Ball is all about the draft. So you can take out your phone, load up the Underdog app, sign up with promo code TFG, and draft your team right now. If you think Jordan Love's going to ball out this year, he's going in like the 13th round or something crazy. You can go and get him there right now on Underdog Fantasy. Their Best Ball Mania 4 competition is the largest fantasy football contest ever to date. $15 million prize pool. That's no weekly transactions, no trades, no waivers. Just draft, set it, and forget it. They will set your best lineup every single week, and you will compete for huge prizes. So that is promo code TFG at Underdog Fantasy if you want to show your support for my channel and for our sponsors who have been awesome to work with, and I just couldn't swear by Underdog anymore. So that's promo code TFG at Underdog Fantasy. But now we are going to get into the roster breakdown here, where we are going to rank each position group how they stack up against the rest of the league. And that is going to start at the quarterback room, where Jordan Love and the Packers are going to rank 26th coming into the year. And, you know, the reality is we just don't really know how good Jordan Love is going to be. And you can't rank him that high because he's barely played. Now, there's a lot to say here. The first thing I want to say is that I do believe in Jordan Love to a very high extent. I think he can be a great quarterback in the NFL. I don't know if he's going to be a tier 1 elite guy, but I definitely think he can be a top 10 quarterback, a quarterback that you win a Super Bowl because of. And I've always been high on Jordan Love. You can go back and check my draft analysis. He was my number 2 quarterback in that draft class with a true first round grade, a higher grade than I had on Tua Tagovailoa because I felt the upside was higher. And unfortunately for me, a higher grade than Justin Herbert, who I just missed on, along with many other people, just missed on Justin Herbert. But for what it's worth, I really have always been a Jordan Love believer and continue to be so. I think you're looking at a quarterback that has all the tools in the book. He has a great arm. He has a very quick release. He loves to play in structure. I think he showed at Utah State that he can and will hang in the pocket, make his reads, get through his progressions. But he also has that ability to know when and how to break the pocket, when to extend plays, and he's got the tools to do it. And he's got, those rare instincts to see those throwing lanes down the field that only so many quarterbacks can see when they're playing backyard football. So I really do think it's all there with Jordan Love. There were a couple weaknesses, though. I had him in that, boomer bust tier of quarterbacks right there with where I had Anthony Richardson this year, where I had Justin Fields coming out. I really had Jordan Love in that level of prospect. Whether I was right or wrong, that's where I had him. And the weaknesses on Jordan Love were, in his final year, he just started to make way too many mistakes. His coordinator left, his receivers left. He was at Utah State. He already didn't have a ton to work with to begin with. And he started to press. He started to force mistakes to try and win games. And while you don't want to see quarterbacks make those mistakes, you can explain away a lot of those, especially when the year before that, he was a much better decision maker. So I think after 3 years of NFL development, there is reason to believe that he can do a better job taking care of the football, though it will be a question mark. You don't want to be Jameis Winston or Carson Wentz out there. But the other thing with Jordan Love that I think I'm actually worried about and need to see that he can be consistent with, and that is accuracy. He sprayed some deep balls, especially. He sprayed even just some short balls to the flat. That was a question mark for him. Is ball placement, consistency with his accuracy. That to me is going to be the biggest thing we need to see from him here in year 4. And they've been trying to do a lot with his throwing mechanics, his footwork to improve those things. And time will tell where that lies. If Jordan Love can be consistently accurate this year, and I think he can, I seriously think Jordan Love is going to shatter this 26th ranking. I think he's going to be a top 15 quarterback in the NFL. I think the Packers as a team will surprise a lot of people. And I think a lot of those Jordan Love haters out there, which there's a lot of them, let's be honest, he is consistently one of the more hated on players in the league by his own fan base and by fans around the league. For whatever reason, a lot of people just don't like Jordan Love. But, again, if those accuracy question marks are answered, I really think he's going to prove a lot of people wrong and shatter this very ranking right here. But overall, I think the 3 years that he's had to sit and develop, while it has worked against him in terms of public favor and people getting impatient to find out what he is, I absolutely think it's going to work in his favor as far as how good he can be right away. I mean, he is not just familiar with the offense, having 3 years in LaFleur's scheme in the meeting rooms to make sure he knows all the reads and all of it, but also just to learn from Aaron Rodgers, his day-to-day, for all the jokes about him being an egotist and all that stuff. The reality is, by all accounts, he's been an awesome mentor for Jordan Love and has basically been open about the fact that he didn't want to be what Brett Favre was to him and has taken Jordan under his wing. And I think that's all going to have a real effect on Jordan Love that could show as early as week 1 in Chicago. In fact, I think last year in the 20 throws that Jordan Love made, we saw a lot of improvements. I mean, man, I know none of these are in starts and a lot of this is garbage time, but some of this is coming in a big game against Philadelphia when Aaron Rodgers got hurt. But you string together his 20 throws from last year, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, wow, that's an NFL quarterback. I mean, the ball's getting out. The release, the decision-making, he's getting through his progressions. He's extending plays when he needs to. The accuracy is great. There is a lot to like and believe in with Jordan Love. This is a highly polarizing factor for this team. we're ranking Jordan Love much closer to his floor at 26 than we are his upside. But I think very much there is a world that Jordan Love is a top 12 quarterback in the NFL this year. And there's really not a lot of people saying that, but I've always been a Jordan Love guy, and I think the circumstances are very favorable for him to reach his upside here, but only time will tell. Now, there's almost a beauty in the fact that it's Jordan Love or bust. If he gets hurt or if he's so bad that they need to bench him, it's Sean Clifford and Danny Etling, which I'm still trying to find a reason other than a decent combine workout for why the Packers felt they needed to spend a 5th round pick on Sean Clifford when there were real football players available. Yeah, can't explain that one. Didn't think he was a remotely draftable prospect based on his Penn State film. But then you also have Danny Etling, who's been flirted around as a wide receiver in the NFL. So they got a couple of athletes back there. But if anything happens to Jordan Love, this is very much a quarterback room that could have them competing for the worst team in the league. Just because the quarterback play would be so bad. I wouldn't be surprised if they went in and grabbed a Teddy Bridgewater or a Carson Wentz or something in that situation. But they are really all in on finding out what Jordan Love can be this year. And a big part of that is starting to invest in this group of weaponry a little bit more. So let's transition to the weapons, where they are going to rank 29th, but I do think this group is better than what they were last year, where they ranked 31st for me last year. It's an entirely unproven group, but I actually really like the skill sets here, and I believe in the players that they have. It's just a matter of these guys working together to reach their upside. But man, if Jordan Love is good, you have one of the more exciting young groups of weaponry in the league. All these guys are in year 1 or year 2, which is just kind of unheard of. But let's break it down. A big reason I think this group is better than it was last year is you have Christian Watson, who looks like a complete total steal and draft hit by Brian Gutekunst. In the 2nd round last year, they traded up to get him. And the first half of the year was obviously rocky. He has the big drop week 1 against Minnesota, kind of gets on Aaron Rodgers' shit list for a little bit, and then gets hurt. So the first half of his year was a complete wash. But the second half of the year, he was a top 20 wide receiver in the NFL, and I don't think that's remotely controversial. I mean, the speed he brings alone is something this offense has desperately needed for years, even when they had Devontae Adams. I mean, he is a guy that can catch a slant or run a jet sweep and be gone for a 60-yard touchdown. This team just has not had run-after-catch explosiveness, and he brings that at a fundamental level. I mean, this guy returned kicks at North Dakota State. But that wasn't really surprising. What was surprising was how much the ball skills came along for Christian Watson, to the point that he was bodying defensive backs on a weekly basis. Tough catches in the end zone on critical downs, tough catches down the field as a vertical threat. There is immense ceiling for Christian Watson after seeing that, because I knew he was going to be a solid deep threat and something like a Marquez Valdez-Scantling for the Packers. But he's shown so much more than Scantling ever did, because Scantling was stiff as a board, couldn't make a guy miss in the open field, and is one of the worst ball skills receivers you'll ever see. Just cannot track the ball, cannot handle contact down the field, drops the ball. Watson showed more ability to win tough catches than any receiver not named Devontae Adams in Green Bay has shown for 6 years. You pair that with all the other tools, and things get really exciting here. Still relatively unproven, still needs to prove that he can work well with Jordan Love, but needless to say, the arrow is pointing up for Christian Watson, and the sky is the limit for what he could be. But then you got Romeo Doubs as the wide receiver 2 here, at least on paper heading into the year. And it's interesting, I really felt like this team should have, at least earlier in the offseason, added a veteran type, whether that was a Juju Smith-Schuster or do the Allen Robinson trade or something like that, where you're getting not a superstar at this point, but an established veteran receiver, an adult in the room, something you can really count on. But the thing is, like, Romeo Doubs showed real upside and real flashes, and I do believe in those flashes. He ends up falling to the 4th round in last year's draft because of pre-draft injury concerns, and unfortunately he did get hurt in his rookie season. So can he stay healthy? That's going to be a big thing here. But if they had brought in one of those players, they wouldn't get the chance to find out if Romeo Doubs can be really good. This is a team that's had immense success with mid-round wide receivers, and I think they feel like Romeo Doubs can turn into a good starter for them. So if they brought in a veteran, they wouldn't get that answer, and they would miss out on the opportunity to have Doubs hit his upside as a quality starting wide receiver, but also the upside of having a starting wide receiver on a really cheap rookie contract for the next 3 years. So there's definitely rationale to buy into Romeo Doubs as a starter. Now, he's got to stay healthy. He's got to clean up his drop issues. Those aren't the hardest things to do, though, when you see a guy that has size, legit route running ability, legit speed to stack corners on the outside. He doesn't have bad ball skills. He had great ball tracking ability on the deep ball at Nevada, flashed that for the Packers, attacks the ball with his hands. That's why he has drops, because he is a hands catcher. He just has to hit the jugs machine there. But I'm excited to see what Doubs can do. I think there is certainly some floor here. Like, there is a chance where he just isn't consistent enough to be a starter and they regret not signing a Juju Smith-Schuster or whatever. But I think the upside is there for him to be, I think, something like a Zay Jones, which when he is your 4th option in the passing game, for example, you're pretty happy with that. But he can be a Zay Jones for really cheap for 3 years here and build a chemistry with a young Jordan Love and a young staff. So it's definitely exciting that he's here, even if he's a risky option. But I think it's less risky when you bring in Jayden Reed in the 2nd round of the draft, who I think has a really nice floor as a prospect. This is a guy that in a worst case scenario can line up in the slot, get open on early downs, secure hands, and be a threat after the catch. But I think he can be more than that. He has legit 4.4 speed, and the best thing Jayden Reed did was he was, I kid you not, the most efficient deep ball receiver in all of college football last year. When he was targeted deep and when he got catchable opportunities, he was fantastic. He was Tyler Lockett-esque. Does that translate to the next level? Only time will tell. But if you want to talk about a physical and skill set comparison, it is Tyler Lockett. Now, he could end up just being Philip Dorsett as well, which is like his floor to me as a useful NFL slot receiver. But I really think for a team that loves to run slot fades, that needs more speed over the middle of the field, he's going to be an excellent fit. And I love the way they went about getting him in the draft, because they needed a slot starter, but they also needed a high floor kind of potential deep threat for this team other than Christian Watson. And I think it takes so much pressure off of Romeo Doubs to be that guy. So I just love how he fits with these three. You've got a clear cut, like most of the time, Jayden Reed will be your slot guy. Doubs and Watson can work the outside. Now, they'll mix things up. They'll play Watson from the slot occasionally, as they did last year, and do some other stuff. But I really think these three players have immense talent, a high level of synergy as far as skill set is concerned, which is really important to me. You want guys that can wear different hats and thrive doing different roles, and I think they have that here. And I think the biggest thing is they're going to be cheap for 3 to 4 years here, which is a huge luxury for the Packers, as they have some big contracts that they still need to figure out, especially if Jordan Love is good. Now, the depth is very mediocre. Mediocre might even be putting it too nicely. They have Samori Toure, who was a 7th-round pick, showed very minor flashes as a vertical threat. I think he can be a wide receiver 5, and that's fine. Maybe he surprises. He does have some tools. A lot of Packers fans like Samori Toure. I certainly would not be counting on him to be anything special, But they also draft Dontavian Wicks in the 5th round. I was not a Dontavian Wicks guy. Some people were. I understand his 2021 season was a lot better than his 2022 season, but I just don't see a guy that's going to separate all that well. He's just not fast. His route running's okay. He does have a springy release off the line of scrimmage. He's a bigger bodied guy that likes to block. So like he's their type for sure. We'll see. If they get 2021 Dontavian Wicks, he might be a value. But I did think there was other wide receivers that were much better options for them at that point. But then they also take Grant DuBose, big-bodied wide receiver out of Charlotte. Another guy I wasn't all that impressed by. I just didn't see the separation. He's a big-bodied ball winner, their type again. But I'm certainly not expecting those guys to be draft steals, although I could obviously be wrong. And then Bo Melton as well. He was a late round pick. I think he fell all the way to the 7th round for Seattle last year. Another player that I was lower on, he had a lot of draft hype. A lot of people expected him to go 3rd or 4th round because of his speed and vertical ability. And for that reason, I do think he has like Darius Slayton type of upside. But when it came to his route running and ball skills, I thought he left a lot to be desired. I really question his ability to track the deep ball. But there are physical tools there, and I know there's going to be some people excited for him to maybe get an opportunity here. I do think he makes the team, but honestly, I'm just not overly optimistic about any of the backup options here. Maybe that's my draft bias coming through, but, I did watch all these guys and evaluate them all in college, and I just didn't see it with this group of backups. So I still think bringing in a veteran is a good idea. But at this point, I would bring in a veteran that's a clear-cut wide receiver 4 type. So maybe, let these guys win their starting jobs and then peruse the practice squads. Maybe Jamison Crowder gets cut from the Giants or like something like that, where the guy's not assumedly going to come in and take one of these guys' jobs, but can at least be a useful backup if anybody goes down. Because if anybody goes down, it's like, holy crap, what are we doing here? And then you have the tight ends, where 2 rookies are going to be playing almost all of the snaps. So it's Luke Musgrave and Tucker Kraft. Luke Musgrave is going to be, to me, the snap leader amidst this group. He's going to be that Robert Tonyan role, where he's their primary receiving tight end. And he's the most talented tight end they've had since Jermichael Finley. I mean, maybe that 1 year of Jared Cook, you could argue. And honestly, Jared Cook is not a horrible comparison for Luke Musgrave at 6'5", 250 pounds with legit, 4-5 level speed to stretch the seam and be a vertical threat from that tight end position. He's going to bring a level of explosiveness and, in my opinion, reliability that they haven't had there. Robert Tonyan has always felt very week to week. I think Musgrave's going to be a much larger focal point of this offense. He, is coming out of Oregon State having only played like 15 games, where he got hurt in his final year and kind of broke out late because he was buried behind a lot of other NFL level tight ends. But man, the tape doesn't lie with him. He's extremely talented. He produced in the games that he did play. I think he showed route running. He showed ball skills. It wasn't the complete package. Like, he's not an amazing blocker or anything like that, but he is just one of these types of athletes that you want to bet on at this position. It doesn't always work with rookie tight ends, but if it's going to work, it's going to be in a situation where he is the clear-cut starter and they need guys to step up in the receiving game. So it's hard to take too firm of a stance really on any of these guys, whether that's Love, the receivers, or the tight end, but it's hard to argue that they don't have talented players that make sense in their roles. And I think you can continue to echo that with Tucker Kraft, who some people question why they would take 2 tight ends. For me, I have done that in my mock drafts and was the least bit surprised, because Green Bay runs almost as much 12 personnel as anybody in the league. They're going to be in 12 personnel probably 20% of the time this year. That's every 5 snaps. You're going to have Tucker Kraft and Luke Musgrave on the field together. And the biggest thing with Musgrave was he's not a great inline blocker. He's more receiver than he is tight end. Well, Tucker Kraft is a full go tight end who was an excellent run blocker. Yes, at a low level of competition coming out of South Dakota State, but he's got the size, he's got the play strength, and he's got the willingness, and he's got the technique. There's no reason he can't be a good inline tight end right away. And I think because he can actually pull away from linebackers and be a threat after the catch, he's an upgrade in many ways from Mercedes Lewis in this role as their quasi-starting tight end, right? It was Lewis and Tunyon, Lewis being the blocker, Tunyon being the receiver. And on 12 personnel, Tunyon's going to be the guy that's a flex tight end off the line a little bit so that his blocking is protected because he's more responsible for safeties and linebackers than he is defensive ends. Well, those two roles now will go to Tucker Kraft as Mercedes Lewis and Luke Musgrave being the Robert Tunyon. It really just makes a ton of sense here. And I think both guys are going to work out because the scheme fits just so perfect. Can't rank them too high coming in because they're entirely unproven and they're rookies, but I'm very optimistic that those guys are going to work out. And then you have Josiah DeGuara, who now we know he's not a starter. They overdrafted him. They always did. Couldn't believe that draft pick when they made it. But as a fullback, as a blocking specialist, someone they can get on the move and be a lead blocker, he has bought into that role. And the tape is pretty good from him when they use him in those assignments. And as a third tight end, I think he can be a useful player in certain packages, but they don't need to count on him to reach some sort of hidden upside that he never had, in my opinion. Was always a weird draft pick, but he can be a useful player for them as a tight end 3 and a fullback. Then they have Tyler Davis, got some athletic traits, probably going to make the team. I'm more interested in Austin Allen, who's 6'8" out of Nebraska, but does really struggle to get leverage and is a remarkably stiff route runner and all that. But I didn't entirely hate his game coming out of Nebraska, so we'll see if he makes the team. But between the receivers and the tight ends and the quarterback, it's hard to take a stand on these guys ranking too high. It'd be ingenuine to the series where I'm not trying to give any team specific benefit of the doubt or anything like that. Sure, there might be some nods here and there, but on paper, this group is the most unproven combination of quarterbacks and weaponry in the entire league. But I really think there is immense upside, and I think there's immense upside now if Jordan Love is as good as I think he can be. Where they are a little bit more proven is with the running backs, because Aaron Jones is simply put one of the best receiving backs in the NFL. He's the complete package: athleticism, route running, pass protection, secure hands, run after catch. What's not to like about having Aaron Jones as a receiving back? There were games last year where he had to be their number one wide receiver. You now have 4 or 5 other options that are legit receiving threats, and you don't have to rely on Aaron Jones to line up in the slot and do what Jaden Reed's going to do. So he's definitely an asset. It's just difficult to make that big of an impact as a receiving running back. Beyond him, A.J. Dillon, not much of a receiving back. Even some drops started to pop up last year. If he can secure those hands, he can be a decent screen target and check down option. Patrick Taylor is a big-bodied bruiser, not much of a receiving threat. I do have my eyes on Tyler Goodson. Really liked him coming out of Iowa. I was stunned that he went undrafted because he has really nice physical tools. He's a great athlete. I think he wasn't utilized in the receiving game at Iowa, but if he's worked on those chops, he has really good tools for it. So I think the opportunity is there for him to make this team. And in the event where Aaron Jones gets hurt, I would love to see what Tyler Goodson has to offer. Lou Nichols, also a 7th round pick. Very productive player at Central Michigan with some tools, kind of as a balanced all-around running back. Not a horrible 7th round pick there. But that rounds out your group of weaponry, where again, they rank 29th in the league. No one's going to have a firm argument for them ranking that much higher, because on paper, this group is entirely unproven. But boy, it's going to be an exciting group to see what they can do. And if you needed any more evidence that nobody operates like the Green Bay Packers, here you go. It is an entirely fresh, green, raw group with a chance to grow into a very dangerous passing game. But things don't always go according to plan, and there's a world where this is just not an NFL caliber receiving group, where You can't count on these receivers. The tight ends don't work because rookie tight ends just don't always work. Where Jordan Love is a complete flop, and this is honestly could be one of the worst passing games in the entire league. I'm not predicting that to happen, but you have to acknowledge the high variance range of outcomes with this group. But let's get to the next position group here, where we are going to revisit these running backs through the lens of how they are as runners of the football. And it's a very familiar group. You've got Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon, your lightning and thunder approach here, a familiar group that's been together for 4 years now. And they're going to rank 8th in the NFL. Aaron Jones doing a lot of the heavy lifting there. And honestly, I thought Aaron Jones had the best year of his career last year. He's always been a fast running back with excellent vision and light feet, with great change of direction ability to change lanes and make the most of well-blocked runs and find second openings on zone runs. But one thing he really took a next step last year, even in his age 28 season, was the ability to make defenders miss, to be elusive in the backfield, to have great contact balance, to shrug off tacklers and find creative ways to, turn poorly blocked runs into decent gains. And to me, that is where you can really add the most value as a runner. Not that vision and speed and change of direction aren't important, but if you're paying a guy over $10 million, I do want them to be able to have a high missed tackle force rate. And up until this year, it didn't feel like Aaron Jones really had that. But if you're getting what you got last year from Aaron Jones, now in his age 29 season, after he just took a pay cut to stay here, by the way, like a legit rare pay cut, not just a contract restructure. If you're getting 53 missed tackles forced on 214 attempts like they did last year, that's a bargain at this point for what he's making this year. So love having Aaron Jones there. Excellent locker room presence. Heading into a contract year, would love for him to continue to play well and get another couple years of good pay for his sake. But with A.J. Dillon behind him, also in a contract year, this is going to be fascinating long-term to see how this plays out. But, to me, Dillon was a little bit disappointing last year, honestly. He wasn't disappointing in doing what you expect of him, which is pick up tough yardage and fight forward and don't have negative gains on the ground, protect the football, which, by the way, is something Aaron Jones really desperately needs to focus on. He seems to have the worst fumbles at the absolute worst of times. A.J. Dillon, not so much. He's got that high and tight ability to hold on to the football, but the explosiveness just wasn't there with A.J. Dillon. And if Aaron Jones were to go down, I don't know if you're getting a lot of big runs from A.J. Dillon. He went down on first contact way more than you would think for a 245-pound running back. He didn't, to me, show the best instincts to bounce runs outside in the situations where that was appropriate. He has decent speed for such a big guy, but he just doesn't let himself tap into that because he's almost to a fault just trying to get 4 yards every play. And again, situationally, that's usually what you want from him. But if you want to be a 3-down back, you got to have a more complete game than that. So for what he is as a power back and a short yardage guy, he's very good in that role. But if anything were to happen to Aaron Jones, it's a pretty big drop-off in this run game. And there's even a little bit of me that wishes this was more of a 70-30 split than it is being closer to like a 55-45 split. Although that does help keep Aaron Jones fresh, which I understand the value in that. Behind them, you have clear-cut backups. Patrick Taylor is your A.J. Dillon backup as the bruiser. And then, to me, Lou Nichols, Tyler Goodson are like-bodied backs to Aaron Jones. Nichols a little bit bigger, but both of them are kind of, good athletes with good shiftiness that can run wide zone, threaten the corner, and maybe not necessarily hit home runs, but have breakaway runs for 15, 20 yards. Both very much unproven, but both Goodson and Nichols have potential. I didn't get around to Emmanuel Wilson either, but yeah, really good running back room. Loved what we saw from Aaron Jones last year. Love A.J. Dillon as the role he plays if Aaron Jones can stay healthy. And definitely going to be interesting to see if one or both or none of these guys earn contract extensions, to which running back would become a huge need for Green Bay by the end of the year. Jordan Love, as far as the QB run multiplier, isn't going to give us a whole lot. He's not an exceptional athlete. He's just functionally athletic. I don't think they're going to run a lot of read option stuff with him. So he's getting kind of the standard play action boot multiplier, where he at least has enough mobility and talent on play action boots to keep that backside defender honest when they're running wide zone, which is really important for these systems. But that 0.5% boost to the run game is pretty standard around the league for teams that run this system. If you were to get to Sean Clifford and Danny Etling in a nightmare situation, I would hope Matt LaFleur dials up some QB runs, because they ain't throwing the ball for first downs. Let's move on to the offensive line. I've hinted at this earlier in the episode, but this is a really good, underrated group. And I got to tell you, I couldn't believe the amount of people I saw, number one, like mocking offensive tackle to the Green Bay Packers in the first round. Yes, it felt like something they might do, but it really didn't make sense when you look at the talent they have on this O-line and their other needs. But beyond that, like specifically with David Bakhtiari, I think the general belief from fans around the league is that he's done and that his knee is completely fried. And yeah, it was a long recovery. He tore his ACL late in the 2020 season, and it wasn't until week 6 of this season that he was able to get back out there. But he did get back out there and was full go, looking like good old David Bakhtiari. There was no drop off in his play. It's not like he was getting beat more or he looked like the knee hadn't recovered. No, he was right back to being arguably the best pass protecting left tackle in the NFL. And then he has a freak appendectomy, which is the same thing that happened to Joe Burrow. Like, it's just a complete freak incident, and he missed a few more games later in the season. And I think everybody just got lazy and thought that was the knee acting up again. And that's just not the case. Like, I think the Packers not drafting a tackle shows you them not trading David Bakhtiari like everybody kept saying. Like, no, David Bakhtiari still has a lot of great football ahead of him. He's not even 32 years old yet, and we've seen, the Teron Armsteads, the Trent Williams, Lane Johnson. I mean, hell, Jason Peters continues to play well at like 39 years old. This is a position that, as long as these guys are physically committed to playing, they can play well into their 30s. So I think Green Bay is very much expecting Bakhtiari to return full go as one of the best left tackles in the NFL this year. And I think that's a very fair assumption. Again, from week 6 on, he was that guy. He just happened to have an appendectomy that set him back a couple weeks. That had nothing to do with his knee at all. So he's almost become one of the more underrated players in the NFL right now, just because people don't understand what his situation is. But to me, he's locked in as their franchise left tackle, and he's going to be an elite superstar. If he wasn't playing great when he came back last year, I'd feel differently, but he was. He was one of the best pass-protecting left tackles in the NFL last year. And then a similar conversation with Elton Jenkins at left guard now, and he had a weird season last year. He also was coming back from an ACL injury, so both these star linemen weren't really ready and available to start the year. Jenkins missed week 1 last year, and then came in week 2 and started at right tackle. That was kind of the plan, was to see what he looks like as a full-time right tackle, because he had played well at left tackle in David Bakhtiari's absence, just before Elton Jenkins got hurt himself. And it honestly wasn't great from him at right tackle. I don't know if, it was just a flash in the pan as far as his ability to be a good tackle. I don't know if it was a going from the left side of the line to the right side of the line thing that was uncomfortable for him. Or I don't know if his knee just wasn't quite up to speed yet. But either way, it was a rough start to his season. But week 7, they put him back at left guard, and he settled back in as one of the better guards in the entire NFL. He got a massive contract extension, well-deserved, and they're just going to keep him there. It's nice to know that in a pinch, he can slide outside and play tackle, but, they paid him top guard money, not top tackle money, and that's where he's been at his best. And with him next to David Bakhtiari, that is straight up one of the best side-by-side tackle guard combos in the league, especially in pass protection. And Jordan Love's blindside is going to be about as well protected as anybody in the league. Now, those two as run blockers, Bakhtiari is not the run blocker he is as a pass protector just because he's elite in his pass protection, but he has developed and honestly continued to add play strength as he's gotten older to the point where he's still a very good run blocker. He's fast off the ball. He is a good athlete. I don't think it's coincidence that his run blocking has taken a step up when the Green Bay went to a wide zone blocking scheme, because he is able to fire off the ball and get leverage and run his feet rather quickly. But he has never been that kind of mauling people mover type in the run game. Elgton Jenkins, likewise, very smooth athlete, good for the wide zone stuff, a little bit more play strength than David Bakhtiari, a little bit better at moving people off the ball. Run game is definitely a strength of Elgton Jenkins as well. But it's not bad as you keep going through the rest of the group, though the left side is certainly better than the right side. You got Josh Myers at center, who still to this day, I can't explain how an NFL general manager decided to take him over Creed Humphrey. Still makes no sense to me. But, Myers, just as we said when he got drafted, has still turned into a solid player. Green Bay, it feels like if they draft a guy in the second round on the offensive line, with their coaching and the amount that he's going to play, as long as he's not deprived of talent, he's probably going to turn to a solid player. And that's what's happened with Josh Myers. He's really solidified his pass protection abilities, become much better at picking up stunts, which was a huge issue for him in his rookie season. Still room to grow there as far as that blitz recognition. There's still occasional times where it'll get past him, but it's been much better. He anchors well. He is a big, wide center. He's got decent athleticism for the wide zone blocking as far as the run game goes, but that is where his deficiencies really show up. He's just not an instinctive run blocker. It's weird. Like, guys will cross his face and he'll miss assignments. He'll leave double teams too early. He'll whiff on linebackers at the next level. It just isn't natural for him. And that's where it was such a big difference between him and Creed Humphrey. But, he's a solid starting caliber center. Heading into year 3, he can still continue to get better. And I think if he's their worst offensive lineman, and I think he will be, you're very happy with that. You got John Runyon at right guard. Runyon's heading into a contract year. He might be the odd man out as far as the finances are concerned. He reminds me a ton of Ben Powers, who just got a big contract from the Denver Broncos, where he is a technician as a pass protector. Unless he's getting overwhelmed by power or physical tools, which just don't happen very often because he maintains good leverage and is usually the first one to strike. Unless that happens, you're not getting by him. So he grades out really well as a pass protector, but he is dinged for his run blocking. He's a notably poor run blocker, especially, you think of a guy out of Michigan, you'd expect him to be a little bit more physically imposing in the run game, and he's just not. He can't really move guys. He really lacks play strength. He has some of the same issues that Josh Myers has, where he'll just struggle to find the right block, for lack of a better way to put that. So between those two guys, it's just not great run blocking. There's no other way to put it. And then you got Zach Tom next to him, who's another guy that really isn't the strongest tackle. He's 295 pounds at 6'4". Not much of a people mover in the run game. I do think he can seal the edge for wide zone, which is nice. But any kind of, downhill run blocking, it's just not really what he's going to be good at, and you'll kind of live with that. Maybe he can do what David Bakhtiari did and add some play strength and get a little bit better in that phase as his career goes on, because, honestly, these grades on Zach Tom look like a young David Bakhtiari coming in as a 4th-round pick, where he's already a very good pass protector because of his foot technique, his hand usage, his overall technique, and understanding of how different pass rushers are trying to beat him. Zach Tom is a total technician, was coming out of Wake Forest, and was in his rookie season. He was a complete steal in the 4th round. Pretty much every draft analyst knew it when it happened. He just happened to fall because of his weird size profile. And even the Packers in his rookie season kind of struggled to figure out where he's supposed to play. He played some guard, he played some left tackle, he's played some right tackle, and you love that flexibility. But in the final game of the year, they benched Yosh Nijman to put in Zach Tom. Tom was much better than Nijman in pass protection in that game. handling Aiden Hutchinson. And I think from that point on, which is where we are now, I think they will say Zach Tom is the guy. Now, this team has made questionable offensive line decisions in the past, as I talked about earlier. And I think another questionable decision would be to start Yosh Nijman over Zach Tom. Not that that's a catastrophic mistake. Nijman has been mostly good. But Nijman's one of those guys, kind of like a Charles Leno, like a worse version of Charles Leno, where when he loses, he seems to lose really bad, where it's like his feet get crossed up, he's whiffing on tackles, and you're getting your quarterback killed. It's just something you notice with Yosh Nijman. Some reps just get completely lost on him. And that applies to him in the run game, too. He has the same issue that like Myers and Runyon have, where they're just not connecting on their run blocks. Even though Nijman is the stronger, better athlete with better length than a guy like Zach Tom, to me, Tom's just a better player, and he's younger, and the arrow is pointing up for him. So I really hope they make the right decision here, and this is the starting five. It wouldn't change a ton if Nijman was in there, maybe dings them down a little bit. But based on what we saw there week 18, I think this is going to be the group. And then Nijman is a great sixth offensive lineman to have. A lot of these guys have positional flexibility, which is great. You know, Zach Tom can slide inside. Elton Jenkins can play center. So, like, as long as they're only losing one guy, you're able to retain a starting caliber offensive line across the board without any true weak links. You have to go deeper than that, and you're going to run into some more trouble, which is kind of what happened to them early last year. And that's what happens to most offensive lines. Most offensive lines don't have 7 quality starters on the old line. But beyond Nijman, it's Royce Newman, who's started a lot of games for this year, and him getting benched was way too late. He probably never should have been starting at right guard. His experience is valuable. He's a decent athlete, but God, he's just a complete turnstile in pass protection, and he's another one of these guys that just doesn't seem to stick on their blocks. It's just an issue that they've had on the right side of that line for a couple years now. But then it's just a bunch of projects after that. You've got Sean Ryan, who was a 3rd-round pick last year. Rasheed Walker, who was a 7th-round pick last year. Highly recruited guy that just kind of fell off at Penn State. You know, I think it was smart of them not to really draft any new projects, because I thought Ryan and Walker, for where they took them in 2021, were good picks. And now with another year of NFL coaching, maybe they can surprise if they get in there. But both of them really didn't show anything in their rookie season. You wouldn't want to count on them. But I suppose keep an eye on both Ryan and Walker as prospects that I like with some upside. This is obviously a team that has done a very good job at developing offensive line over the years, and that's been no different. A full display here with Nijman, Myers, Runyon, Zach Tom. None of these guys were heavily invested pieces. Even David Bakhtiari was a 4th-round pick. I would imagine Jake Hansen also makes it as another backup center, and they'll keep 10. The rest of these guys are undrafted types. Luke Tenuta is the only other guy that I would say maybe keep an eye on. Would probably have to beat out Rasheed Walker. As far as their skill blockers go, pretty solid group. You know, Luke Musgrave's going to be an interesting piece to monitor. Basically, just how bad is he going to be as an inline blocker? Because even though they'll scheme around him, putting Tucker Kraft in there, they won't be able to entirely avoid Luke Musgrave having to block defensive ends and linebackers. And how well can he hold up there? It was not a strength of his at Oregon State. He's a willing guy. He just doesn't have a lot of play strength or leverage as a blocker. But I do expect Tucker Kraft to be a good run blocking tight end, if not a great one right away. And then Josiah DeGuara, for the role he's going to play, is going to be a valuable run blocker. And then we know their receivers are going to run block. Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, they've got size. I wouldn't say they showed to be dominant run blockers in their rookie season, but they were drafted for a reason. It's because they're willing to do that. So definitely won't be an issue there. It's an average group of skill blocking, run blocking skill players, and certainly worse than what they had last year with Lewis and Alan Lazard. But overall, they're going to rank 4th in pass protection, 24th in run blocking, so like the complete opposite of the Falcons that we just did, where they were, I think, 4th in run blocking and 24th in pass protection, so that's kind of ironic. But some lines are just built differently, right? And the Packers do rank 7th in overall offensive line. We got a suggestion to come up with that overall offensive rank. All I'm doing is taking the average of the pass block grade and the run block grade and creating a new ranking there. So 7th overall offensive line for Green Bay. But let's tie a ribbon on the Packers offense. They're going to rank 19th overall offensively, 23rd in the passing game, 13th in the run game. And I will just say they have so much potential, but that's really all we have to go off of right now for Green Bay. And I think 19th is a solid ranking. They have a chance to be a lot better than that. They have a chance to be a little bit worse than that too. Again, not a whole lot of teams constructed this way with the full-on youth approach at quarterback and receiver. But let's move on to this defense, which is actually a frustrating conversation because the talent on this defense is insane, but it is dragged down like a 10-ton anchor by Joe Barry and his scheme, if you can even call it that. But it is a fun roster to look at on paper, even though we know they're going to underachieve, just as the Packers defense has been doing for 15 years, because this team seemingly is incapable of hiring a good defensive coordinator to get these guys in the right spot. But let's get into it, starting with this defensive line that is no joke, one of the most talented defensive lines in the entire NFL. Much better as a pass rushing group than they are as a run defending group. But they're going to rank 6th as pass rushers and 18th in D-line run defense, so still not bad there. And this group is obviously headlined by Rashawn Gary. Now, I can't really say obviously because he continues to be, for whatever reason, one of the most underrated players in the entire NFL. I don't know if it's because there was a lot of pre-draft hate against Rashawn Gary, the fact that he was drafted as a backup because Green Bay just seems to like to do this, where they're planning ahead of time. You know, Rashawn Gary was behind Preston and Zadarius Smith for the first 2 years of his career. So yeah, it took a while for him to show what he can do and to get those live reps and develop his game. But year 3, 2021, his first year as a starter, he comes out and finishes 2nd in the league in pressures behind just Max Crosby. Coming into 2022, after that year, I said in this video last year, is like, hey, put a little money on Rashawn Gary to win Defensive Player of the Year, because they're at like 75-1 or something absurd. Like, people just don't seem to realize that he's genuinely one of the best edge players in the league. And those odds were just stupid for a guy that his arrow was pointing up and very well could win that award. You look at that those same odds, week 8, Rashawn Gary was, I think, 2nd behind only Micah Parsons at that point. So before the unfortunate ACL injury, he was starting to get that credit, but that injury could not have come at a worse time when he was just starting to kind of burst onto the public scene as one of those premium edge rushers. And now as he heads into year 5, looking for a new contract. Now, the injury happened week 10, and that would set him at about a 10-month recovery to get back for training camp. And by all accounts, recovery is going well. Usually an ACL, they say, takes 9 months. There's no previous history of Rashawn Gary. But with this team, when we saw how long it took David Bakhtiari to get back, there's going to be a little bit of hesitation there for sure. But by all accounts, he should be ready to go this season. And if he is, I fully expect Rashawn Gary, with his dominant bull rush, his ability to push the pocket, and I think he gets a bad rap for being a bull rush only player. Yes, it's his go-to move, and it's a damn effective move, but he does have legit 4.5 speed and great get-off. He can threaten to the edge. He has a dominant rip move as well, and he's still young. The sky's the limit for him to start really packaging more rush moves together, but even if he doesn't, he's a dominant pass rusher with just a couple of pass rush moves. So I expect him to only continue to show that he is one of the best edge rushers in the league and to earn a massive contract, upwards of $30 million a year, which I'm sure some people will call an overpay. But when you look at his numbers since he's been a starter, they're right there with Nick Bosa, Myles Garrett, whatever edge rusher you want to put their numbers up against Rashawn Gary, he can match it. Now, I'm still taking those other guys. I'm not going too crazy here, but that's the breadth of pass rusher that Rashawn Gary can be mentioned with if he has the season he's capable of. And really, after you get through Myles Garrett, Nick Bosa, Micah Parsons, and TJ Watt, probably Max Crosby, I think Rashawn Gary should be at the top of your list as far as who's next, as far as best pass rushers, edge rushers in the NFL. Now, he's not the run defender that he is a pass rusher. That is something to keep an eye on because he has all the physical tools in the world to be a great run defender at 270 pounds with great length and play strength, and the effort is there too. His problem is he just wants to keep his eyes inside, and he will knife inside, and occasionally he'll blow plays up and make splash plays against the run, but way too often he loses that gap discipline to the edge, and teams bounce things outside. So that's something he's got to get better at. But overall, he's still a good run defender. But then I want to talk about Kenny Clark, who I think is their next best player on this defensive line. And from a grading perspective, he had a down year last year and wasn't quite as efficient as a pass rusher. Certainly didn't grade out well as a run defender. But, you know, the highlight play is the ability for him to slip blocks and line up as a 3 technique and be a dominant defensive tackle. It's all still there. The problem is Joe Barry will come out in nickel defense no matter what. Feels like very seldom is he forced his hand, quote unquote, to put 3 defensive tackles out there. But on those 4 lineman fronts, when it's Dean Lowry and Devontae Wyatt, Jerron Reed, your best option to take on double teams and play the nose is Kenny Clark. And he can do it. He's just very hit or miss. He's only about 315 pounds. He's a guy that is trying to save a little bit of juice to get after the quarterback. They ask a ton of Kenny Clark in the run game, and he still makes plays. It's just he's never going to grade out consistently in the scheme that they ask him to play. But he's still an excellent pass rusher. He can definitely win with power. That is not in question at all. He's got pretty good quickness and a combination of pass rush moves as well to stem off of that. And again, I still think he's a very good run defender in realistic run defense situations. Like when they bring Tadaro Slayton out there, who's 340 pounds, to eat blocks as a nose, and Kenny Clark gets to eat as a 3 technique, one-on-one, he's virtually unblockable. So I still think Kenny Clark is an awesome defensive tackle, one of the 10 best in the league, and he'd be the best defensive lineman for a lot of the defensive lines that we've covered so far, and he's their second best in Green Bay. But it definitely does not stop there. Let's bounce back out to the edge, where we have Preston Smith, who's like the prototype number 2 edge player in the NFL. And what's good for Green Bay and for Packers fans is Preston Smith basically has, for the last 4 years, rotated between great year and average year, and last year was an average year for him. So if the trend continues, you can get 65 pressures and 13 sacks from Preston Smith. I don't know if you fully expect that, but my point is, he as your 3rd best edge rusher, or just 3rd best defensive lineman rather, is ideal. He's a complete handful as a rusher. He comes in with length and power and kind of this unique pass rushing style where he's just kind of chopping at you, bending around you. He's not going to destroy you with speed and bend. He's not going to destroy you with power, but he's a persistent rusher. He's excellent in those cleanup situations because he's just a difficult player for offensive linemen to get their hands on. So when you have Rashawn Gary and Kenny Clark and hopefully Lucas Van Ness now collapsing the pocket and forcing the quarterback to scramble, Preston Smith is really good at navigating his way as the cleanup man. So he's really an ideal player there. Very good run defender as well. Much more reliable as far as setting a hard edge than Rashawn Gary. And typically, you don't want to run wide zone towards Preston Smith. But they feel like they can get even better there as they draft Lucas Van Ness. And I loved this draft pick, man, because Lucas Van Ness is basically what Rashawn Gary was coming out of Michigan, where he's a freak athlete. The tape doesn't lie. You're looking at a guy that can fly off the ball and overwhelm NFL-level tackles with his bull rush. A guy that theoretically has the play strength to defend the run really well off the edge, but a guy that didn't have great production at Iowa, had even less than Rashawn Gary did because they didn't even use him as a full-time starter. He's really young as a redshirt sophomore, but This is almost an identical situation to when the Packers took Rashawn Gary. Did they need Lucas Van Ness? No. Did they need Rashawn Gary at the time? No, they had just signed the two Smith brothers. But look what Rashawn Gary has turned into, and I think it's going to be an almost identical path there. Now, they will use him, and it is nice that if Rashawn Gary is a little bit slow to come back from the ACL, he can step in and give you the same role as that full speed ahead bull rusher. But even once Gary's back, I still think they will use him. They love 5-man defensive line setups, so he'll come in as a 4-eye where he can devastate a guard. We saw that at Iowa. He can even kind of hold up as a 3 technique. Not great, but I'm sure they'll try it, at least on definite pass rush downs. But, long term, we haven't even talked about Devontae Wyatt yet. You got 4 highly talented first-round picks on that defensive line. That's the Washington Commanders, the San Francisco 49ers. That's kind of their approach to just build through the defensive line. And this really has potential to be just as good as those groups. Of course, pending if Lucas Van Ness can hit his upside. But let's come back to the starters here with Devontae Wyatt, who is a fascinating case study and another one of these players that there's really no reason why he shouldn't be really good. There's also not really any reason why they didn't play him more last year. Snap by snap, Devontae Wyatt looked really good, especially for a rookie defensive tackle. Now, you certainly expected that. He was 24 years old, but Joe Barry and this staff were relentlessly stubborn to play Dean Lowry and Jerron Reed, who were okay, but there was no doubt that Devontae Wyatt looked like the better player. He started to get more playing time as the year went on, and here he is with the full faith of this team now as a plug-and-play starter. They didn't bring in a bunch of other players to challenge him. They didn't retain Lowry. They didn't retain Jerron Reed. They're full go with Devontae Wyatt now, and that's exciting because with all of these pieces around him, you're looking at a really capable pass rushing 3 technique with a lot of upside. He's got great quickness. He can win with cross chops. He can win with power, spin moves. He has a full pass rushing tool belt to beat you. He's a capable run defender. He's definitely not the biggest guy. He plays right around 300 pounds. So he'll get moved off of double teams, but he's willing and he tries. Was taught that discipline at Georgia. So again, a player that the arrow should be pointing up. We just don't have a lot of sample size for what he can do. But man, if he hits his upside as maybe Daron Payne, kind of good number 2 defensive tackle. You got Kenny Clark. You got Rashawn Gary as your true number 1 edge guy. And then Preston Smith and Lucas Van Ness. Are you kidding me? That is an absurd level of talent for a defensive line by NFL standards. Really capable of being one of the 3 best in the league. And it really doesn't stop there. You have good depth. You have Kingsley and Agbury on the edge, who is kind of a slightly poor man's Preston Smith. He's not the most powerful guy, certainly not bendy or the fastest guy, but he's a persistent player. In year 1, he showed that he's got some good, solid tools to both defend the run and get after the quarterback. Wasn't able to do either at a starting caliber level in his rookie season, but as a 4th guy off the edge, you'll absolutely take that. I also like Justin Hollins as a rotational stand-up edge. They'll drop him into coverage. He's got really good sideline-to-sideline speed. He's a useful player. Jonathan Garvin looked like a useful player before Agbury and Hollins kind of took over last year. And then they even bring in Brenton Cox out of Florida. Going to be tough for him to make the team because there's so many players here. But I like Brenton Cox's tape. He just had a horrible workout that dropped his stock into the undrafted range. So it is certainly one of the most talented deep edge groups in the entire league. And then you go inside, and there's not nearly as much depth. I do like TJ Tadaro Slayton as a nose tackle. Again, they just don't go base defense as much as they should to try and stop the run. But when they do, he'll come in, and that is when they have their best run stops, is when Kenny Clark can play a 2-tech, or a 3-tech and not face as many double teams, let Tadaro Slayton play the nose where he's much more capable of it. Not a whole lot of pass rushing ability there, but he definitely makes sense as a role player there. And then they bring in a couple of hybrid defensive end types, two guys that played edge in their final season in college, both Colby Wooden, a really athletic guy out of Auburn, and Carl Brooks, a really productive player out of Bowling Green. I like both these players for what they could be here as rotational three techs. Wooden, I definitely didn't have a fourth round grade on, but seeing him get drafted to play interior defensive line did make a lot more sense to me because his edge tape just wasn't good, but he looked weird and out of position playing on the edge. I really question why they did that with Wooden at Auburn, because the year before that, he played a lot more interior, and that's where his quickness really was effective for him. So there could be something there moving back to an interior position, get him to play up closer to 290 pounds and get him to develop, but very much a raw, toolsy type of pick there. And then Carl Brooks, wildly productive pass rusher off the edge at Bowling Green, but a lower level of competition and a guy that did that at 6'3", 290 pounds. So, he's going to slide inside, and I think his pass rushing skill set can work to a decent degree as a rotational piece, but I don't know if he's going to have the play strength to defend the run at a consistent level or be a consistent pass rusher there. Then you got a couple of, low-level veterans, Jonathan Ford, Chris Slayton, who have barely played in the league. So definitely not the best depth on the interior. I still would love to see them pick up, an Ndamukong Suh or something like that, a veteran, to just eat up some snaps and provide a little bit more depth there. But overall, this is a fantastic defensive line, probably an underrated defensive line. And if anybody's going to save Joe Barry's job this year, it's going to be this group right here. Just kicking ass, taking names up front. But then you get to the linebackers, and it's an interesting group for sure. They ranked 12th in coverage and 29th in linebacker run defense. So you got Devondre Campbell, who's a stud linebacker, made an all-pro team a year ago. More of an up-and-down year last year, but he didn't regress all the way back to basically being that no-name that was available for free for Green Bay. Like, he was still making a ton of plays in coverage, was okay against the run. He just doesn't have the quickest response time as a run defender, so you will see him late to the play against the run. But he does have shed strength, he does have length, he's an extremely consistent tackler, which all make him a solid run defender. But again, in coverage, he's super instinctive. He's got speed. He's got, he's 6'4" with these lanky Spider-Man arms over the middle of the field. And he's now shown 2 years in a row to be, I would say, one of the 10 best coverage linebackers in the NFL. Unfortunately, they don't have anyone established next to him. They have first-round pick Quay Walker, who had a super polarizing rookie season. I am on record saying this was the worst pick of the first round in 2022. And I still believe that, given the context of where this team was at. To take a linebacker, specifically to take this linebacker there, was just wild. Now, I also said after that take that it's not even that I don't think Quay Walker in time will become a pretty good player for the Green Bay Packers, and I still believe that. It's just more about drafting that position group and drafting a raw athlete in the first round. The time it takes for them to get there is not worth what you have to spend to get those players when there's just as many guys in the second and third rounds that have similar tools that you can also wait 2 years to be good. And that's kind of what we're doing with Quay Walker, is just waiting for him to get good. Because the flashes are clearly there. He's got the size. He can thump between the trenches. There's splash plays in coverage when he gets to just man up tight ends and running backs out of the backfield and just run and play fast. The tools are absolutely there. There's great flashes of him as a blitzer as well. But in both phases, it's way too often he just doesn't know what he's doing. He was one of the worst linebackers in the NFL as far as reading and reacting, at least starting linebackers. And that's the other problem with these first round picks, is they're by default going to start because of where you drafted them. They don't have to earn those starting jobs. They don't have to put in that extra 2 hours in the film room to try and earn that opportunity, which I think is something that can really help out a lot of these linebackers to process the game like that. It's such a difficult linebacker position. So I do think Quay is going to continue to get better. I think he's going to continue to see the run faster, arrive quicker, and also in coverage, naturally there's going to have to be some development there, but one of my biggest knocks on Quay Walker and why I didn't see him as anywhere close to a first-round prospect was he just doesn't look around in coverage. He just is strictly looking at the quarterback's eyes and doing this. And it's like, that is basically a wasted player. So like Joe Barry, you might as well treat him like Devin White and just blitz him. That's basically what Devin White does too. Because like any good quarterback is going to see Devin White doing, or Quay Walker doing that, and just be like, all right, I'll just wait till that crossing route gets another 2 yards of depth. I'll just drop it right behind his head. And it's going to be there every single time. So like, you wish you had a coach here that could teach Quay Walker to say, okay, if it's 3rd and 8, get to your spot, but then maybe take a look at how routes are developing around you so that you're not just getting manipulated back there. It's pretty brutal. And I don't know if that part of his game is going to come along. You really hope it does. But as long as Joe Barry is the coach here, I just don't know. Never really saw the plan with this pick. I don't think he's ever going to be like a horrible linebacker like he was in the first 8 weeks of the season, because he did settle in, started to play a little bit better. But I just don't see a player that processes the game at a fast enough level. I felt like at Georgia, he got to play behind that ridiculous defensive line, and Nakobe Dean was the guy that had to do a lot of the processing and a lot of the difficult linebacker stuff. Quay Walker was taken off the field on 3rd down at Georgia. So I was like, how the hell do you draft that guy in the first round? And a lot of those issues showed up in his first year with the Packers. I also don't like that he's shoving referees every other week and getting ejected. So certainly expecting some growth from Quay Walker. I don't know if it's going to be immense growth. I really would not bet on him to ever be like a star linebacker, but I think he can settle in as a good linebacker too. And if your second linebacker is the worst player on your defense, you're totally fine with that. Tampa Bay won a Super Bowl with that setup. So hopefully Gutekunst learned his lesson and they can kind of live to see another day there after lighting a first-round pick on fire. But you do have some depth here. Isaiah McDuffie, I'm not convinced is currently a worse linebacker than Quay Walker. It's probably close. I think when McDuffie was asked to play last year, he looked really good. He looked better than Quay Walker did. I always liked Isaiah McDuffie as a 5th-round pick. In fact, my grades coming out were very close on Isaiah McDuffie and Quay Walker. Walker just had a little bit more upside because of the physical tools. McDuffie a little bit smaller. But I think McDuffie does have really good instincts. He's theoretically good for special teams here. And I don't know how his opportunity is really going to come here, but I will just say keep an eye on him. I thought he played well when he got opportunities last year, and he's a prospect I've believed in since he came out. They also have Eric Wilson, veteran backup type special teamer. And then Tariq Carpenter seems to be making a official conversion to linebacker. He's listed at 230 pounds. That's interesting. Converted safeties to linebacker is always fun. You never know how those transitions will end up. Usually nothing comes of it, but you never know. So it's a pretty good linebacker room. They rank 12th in coverage, with Devondre Campbell doing most of the heavy lifting there. Linebacker run defense does rank 29th. They're very tightly knit in a group from like 20 to 30 of just like linebacker run defending groups. These guys were at times an issue last year. They were at times a strength. I think it's going to be a little bit more of the same there. Certainly could exceed this if Quay Walker can figure some stuff out. But let's move on to the secondary, where this is another really talented group that's probably held back by Joe Barry. Not probably, certainly held back by Joe Barry. On paper, to me, they rank 10th in the NFL. They are, however, in the bottom tier for defensive back run support, which is something to keep in mind here as we go. But starting with the cornerback room, you have Jair Alexander, who is one of the 3 best cornerbacks in the NFL. If you don't believe that, I don't really know what to tell you. He's insane. He has lightning quick feet. He has long speed. He finds the football. He's physical against the run. He is smart in zone coverage. He's sticky in man coverage. I don't know what there isn't to love about Jair Alexander, or what else there really is to say about that. Luckily for Joe Barry, he's a scheme-proof corner that's going to thrive wherever you put him. And that's not always the case with cornerbacks, but he's one of them. Made an all-pro team last year, earned a top-of-the-market contract extension. I mean, he's Jair. Like, the dude's a rock star. Beyond him, you have Rasul Douglas and Eric Stokes, who missed a large chunk of last season for injury. It's a really good number 2, number 3 group of corners. The only weird thing that this team is trying to kind of figure out still is who the hell is their slot corner when they need to have a slot corner on the field, because all these guys are at their best on the outside. And their best slot corner is Jair Alexander, but you also don't want to just throw Jair in the slot every time. So they definitely struggle with that dilemma. You know, both Douglas and Stokes are much more stiff in terms of lateral movement are concerned, which is one of the premium traits for a slot corner. So if you put these guys into the slot, there's times where they're going to get dotted up, especially when you're running quarters and they don't have a lot of intermediate support against these great slot route runners. So it's a weird mesh of skill sets and scheme. Not that they're horrible from the slot, but they're not, locked down there either. But you put either Douglas or Stokes on the outside, and they're both very good starting corners. Different skill sets, but very good in their own ways. Rasul Douglas is one of the smartest zone corners in the league. His reaction time and understanding of route combinations and ability to read and react to the quarterback's eyes, paired with his length and ball skills, it's really impressive. He's kind of a poor man's Trayvon Diggs in a lot of ways, where he's a risk taker. He's going to suffer his losses in coverage, but it's also going to result in, maybe 4 or 5 picks any given year. I was worried that Douglas was a bit of a one-year wonder and they were going to regret paying him and he was going to go back to being just kind of a mediocre replacement level player, which he was when they picked him up for free off the street. But I really think he has found a scheme that is excellent for his skill set, being such a zone-heavy team. Eric Stokes, on the other hand, is like the complete opposite. He is kind of a bump and run man coverage corner that is stuck in a off-zone quarters system. Now, he's heading into his 3rd year in this system. There's a world where he really figures out a lot of the zone stuff and his playmaking instincts really start to tick up, but it's just not always something he's comfortable with, reading and reacting and being aggressive in the right situations. He's much more comfortable just riding a guy's hip pocket, using his 4.3 speed, staying physical at the catch point, where that's his better film. But again, in this system, it just has been very up and down. Literally, he has a lot of coverage busts. He just doesn't understand his assignment. He'll collapse downfield when it's cover 3, leaving the top of his zone wide open. He'll match the wrong guy in quarters. That week 1 game against Justin Jefferson, he had a huge blown assignment. So there's just a lot of mental stuff that still needs to come for Eric Stokes. But as a 1st round pick, he's got a lot of talent. Was deprived most of his 2nd season. So I think he can be a really good number 2 opposite of Jair Alexander. Still has several years left on that rookie contract. So, they're good players. It's just Joe Barry doesn't make it any easier on himself or on these players by finding the right system to use these guys. And it's not easy. These guys all have different skill sets. It's tough to know exactly how to maximize their skill sets, but that's the job of a defensive coordinator. And if you want a little suggestion, just off the top of my head, maybe try Rasul Douglas as a safety and Darnell Savage in the slot. Just an idea. I doubt we'll see it. But beyond those 3, it's a remarkably thin cornerback room. You do have Keyshawn Nixon, who burst onto the scene as a return man last year, but was very up and down in coverage. He is a veteran. He's got good athleticism. I don't think he's a useless defensive back when it comes to coverage, but certainly a risk taker. And as a dime back, someone that can just try to break on balls, try to get the ball in his hands, where he's obviously electric as a returner, kind of in that PJ Williams role where when they go dime, they'll bring him in, just try to make some plays. That's fine. I don't think he's a lockdown coverage player. And if one of the starters went down, I don't think you'd feel good about Keyshawn Nixon stepping in. Beyond that, you have a couple of developmental guys. Although Shamar Jean-Charles in year 3, can you really call him developmental at this point? He's probably just low-end depth, but I did like the Carrington Valentine pick. I was surprised he was available in the 7th round. I mean, he's a true junior with great size and athleticism, physical player coming out of Kentucky, the SEC, where, I thought his tape was okay. I don't know, there's a lot to work with there. Definitely keep an eye on him if he gets on the field. Ideally, he doesn't. Ideally, he just gets to chill as a backup and learn. But yet Corey Ballantyne, who's played a little bit in the league, a bunch of undrafted types. Really not a lot of depth at all in this cornerback room. Would love to see this team maybe make a phone call to Casey Hayward, who would be great in this system, or something like that, just to have a little bit more veteran depth. Hayward obviously started his career in Green Bay. So, this team typically doesn't like to get to bring in too many free agents, but that's what I'd be doing. It is much worse at safety. I think this is the Rams are down pretty bad, but the Packers are definitely one of the worst safety groups in the league. It's not a complete dumpster fire. These guys can play a little bit, but you definitely wish you had a more established starter back there. So Rudy Ford has actually had a couple of good years now. He was brought in as a 7th-round pick out of Auburn, basically just a developmental speedster with like 4.3 speed, played special teams. But, he was brought into Jacksonville in 2021, played a lot of slot corner, safety stuff, and was solid. He was a good dime back for them. And then Green Bay picks him up, and he ends up playing a lot of safety for them last year. And he was kind of a godsend as the defense picked up late last season. You could even argue the arrow is pointing up for him. It's just he's 29 years old. It'd be pretty rare for him to emerge as a star player. It's not unheard of, but if he can just be something between what he was in Jacksonville and what he was last year, he's a starting caliber safety. He's not a good run defender. He doesn't trigger downhill. He doesn't tackle well. When you run a lot of quarters, you need your safeties to be willing, active, smart run defenders, and neither Ford or Savage are that. And when you're talking about a team that really struggled to defend the run, they lost Adrian Amos. It could be even worse there as far as the run support from these guys. Darnell Savage is the other guy, slated to be their starter. Weird fall off for Darnell Savage. It's interesting. It could just be scheme and usage, but to me, I see a guy that has lost all of his confidence, that just doesn't show high-end football IQ on the back end. He struggles to navigate his way into throwing lanes, to anticipate route breaks, and really wherever he's lining up, whether it's from the slot, from free safety, especially in quarters where he really struggles to understand those match rules, when to trigger, when to stay. It's been an overall train wreck of the last 500 days for Darnell Savage. They moved him into the slot late last season. I thought he showed some good flashes there. If they allowed him to just, go play man coverage from the slot in a different system where they want to run a lot of cover one, kind of avoid quarters, I still think Darnell Savage has great physical tools to be more of a corner than a safety. They did experiment with it last year. It's an option for them. But to say Savage is on the hot seat is the understatement of the year for this Packers team. I mean, he's going to have to earn a starting job in camp with some of these other bodies they bought in. And, he was a liability for this team, not just in coverage, but even more so as a run defender, where he missed 1 million tackles coming downfield. And again, that is emphasized in a quarters-heavy system where they're playing 6-man fronts, and they really need these safeties to fill and tackle consistently, and he failed miserably at that. So he currently is the worst player slated to start for this defense until proven otherwise, though he's got tools and showed promise earlier on in his career, so we'll see. They do have some interesting depth. They bring in Tavarius Moore, who's a really fast, bigger-bodied guy that loves to hit. Never shown too much as a starting caliber player. And then Jonathan Owens, who has started a lot of games for the Houston Texans and been okay back there, but neither guy you're excited about. The one guy I am actually excited about to potentially see here is the 7th-round pick Anthony Johnson Jr., who the viewers of this channel are very familiar with me talking about the long list of safeties in the NFL who run a lot of quarters that were slot corners that have converted to safety. There's a huge list of low-invested players that have turned into star safeties through that path. And I see very similar traits with Anthony Johnson. This is a guy that played outside corner for 4 years and stuck around, converted to slot corner in his 5th year, where he was pretty damn good, but just not the most physically gifted player. But for a safety, he has good speed and good size. He's now kind of had that full breadth of playing outside corner, slot corner, and now he's going to be a safety here. And maybe he has maybe he brings the option to be slot corner depth in the same way that Darnell Savage is, but I really think his upside is as a starting safety potentially for this team, and I wouldn't be all that surprised if eventually they have had it with Darnell Savage or Rudy Ford doesn't live up to what he did last year and they go to Anthony Johnson to see what he can do. I think there's something there, and I'm very curious to see how he plays. Beyond that, you got a couple of special teamers in Leavitt and Gaines. One of them probably makes the team for what they bring to that side of the game, but Moore and Owens are probably good special teamers too. So there is your secondary. Again, it's a good group. They rank 10th. They have one of the best cornerback rooms in the league. They got to figure out the safety group, and if they do, this can be one of the better secondaries in the league, but I think those safeties will take their lumps this year. You'd rather have a down safety group than a corner group, and it sure as hell is nice to have those corners. But yeah, it's on paper, it's not the prettiest looking safety room. So that rounds out the defense. It's a polarizing unit to discuss. I mean, you have, on paper, one of the most gifted, physically talented defenses in the entire league, but by far the worst coaching in the league. And a coach that has really proved throughout his career that his defenses are going to underperform, that he's not going to put his players in the best position to succeed, and that it's going to be a perpetual liability for this team. So again, I cannot believe they kept Joe Barry, because I would have loved to see what this team would look like with Vic Fangio coaching it, with Ejiro Evero coaching it. But we're not going to get to see that because the Packers don't have an owner and they're afraid of change. So I'm expecting a pretty similar year where they're pretty good against the pass, though their squishy, scared approach allows for way too much easy stuff and easy conversions of third and short, third and medium. But they do rank 15th in pass defense and 29th in run defense, where the scheme really hurts them. They don't put these guys in the right run fits. These linebackers aren't great run defenders. Their defensive back run support is pretty poor from those safeties. It's basically putting an immense amount of pressure on Kenny Clark. And there's only so much Kenny can do. So overall, they rank 20th as a defense. No one's going to look forward to playing this team because they're going to be difficult to handle in one-on-one situations. But at some point in every given game, they're going to do something stupid or give you something easy and walk out of it like, oh, wow, that was nice. Thank you, Joe Barry. Just hopefully they can get through this year, get some player development, and come to their senses and finally fire Joe Barry. But I'm just not optimistic that things are going to work themselves out. The upside is there. I would love it if Joe Barry proved me wrong, but I just think it's kind of stupid to expect that. So overall, it is a very balanced team for what it's worth. 19th on offense, 20th on defense. I do have questions about the special teams. I always have questions about the Packers special teams. I am slightly optimistic that year 2 of Rick Bisaccia here can continue to improve the culture on special teams. I do like that for the first time in years, they're actually bringing in the veteran options. They've always kind of churned through undrafted types to be return men and coverage guys. Now it's like hungry veterans that have proved that they can play special teams. So like in theory, their coverage should be much better now in year 2 with Rick Bisaccia here, but it was a problem for them last year, even with Bisaccia. And then of course the kicker situation is a massive question mark. We don't know anything about this rookie kicker, Carlson out of Auburn. They also have Keyshawn Nixon returning kicks, which is definitely a thumbs up. They're trying to build something there. It didn't go great in the first year with Bisaccia, but I still believe in Bisaccia. But let's tie a ribbon on this thing, taking a look at their strengths and weaknesses. Their strengths are pretty clear cut for me. Like the strengths that they do have are top of the league level strengths. Pass protection is going to be awesome, I think, this year. I think their pass rush is going to be awesome and is a group that probably doesn't even get enough credit for how good they are. And then the cornerbacks are awesome as well. Those are legit strengths at critical positions that it's going to be difficult for this to be a bad football team when those important positions like that are going to be as good as they are. As far as the weaknesses go, there's 2 clear-cut question marks for this team. The biggest of which for me is Joe Barry. Can he make any semblance of an adjustment to his failures from last season? If not, it's going to be a mediocre defense, an offense trying to figure things out, and a middle-of-the-road football team. If he can make some adjustments, this is a top 10 roster defensively. This can easily and should be a top 10 defense. The fact that it wasn't last year should be viewed as a catastrophic failure and something that warranted the firing of Joe Barry. Maybe that happens this year. I don't know. But the other thing is the quarterbacks and weaponry. Like, just massive unknowns across the board with Jordan Love, and that young group of weapons has potential to be a weakness for this team. It has potential to be a borderline strength, depending on how well things go. But, those are two highly polarizing factors for this team's season. The roster talent is absolutely there. And I think as we start to look at this team's schedule, they absolutely have the potential to still win this division in their first year without Aaron Rodgers. Their schedule isn't that bad. The nice thing is, they do play some pretty bad defenses to start the year. Chicago, I don't think Detroit's defense is all that. They got the Raiders. Atlanta should be improved, as we discussed. Even New Orleans doesn't have that fear factor. The nice thing about the Packers is you're going to know after week 5 kind of how the season's going to go. Because I think if Jordan Love isn't playing well against those defenses, and if these receivers aren't playing well in year 2, you're going to kind of know, all right, this is not heading the way you want it to. But there's a world where they open up pretty strong there. I think you got 3 50-50 games at Chicago, at the Raiders. I think Detroit at home is 50-50, especially without Jamison Williams there in week 4. I think New Orleans at home is winnable for them, and I think they could go to Atlanta and win, but they should be underdogs in that one. But things do get harder as they go. They get that week 6 bye. It was a little bit early. Then they have some tough games that they got at Denver, at Pittsburgh, at Detroit, at the Giants, at Carolina, at Minnesota. I see them as underdogs in all of those games. And then they have to host Kansas City and the Chargers. So they're going to have to build up some momentum, build up some confidence early, and then win some close games, which was an issue for them last year. But I've got them coming out at 8 wins, which is just over their over-under. It just kind of depends on how you feel about Jordan Love on whether or not you want to bet that. My gut tells me this is an 8 or a 9 win team. I think they need 10 to win this division. So you probably need to, pull off an upset at Detroit or at Minnesota, or steal one in Pittsburgh or at Denver, something like that. Certainly possible. They have the roster talent to do it. It is just a matter of reaching their upside and showing us what they got. Difficult team to predict this year. They are uniquely crafted with the youth in the skill position groups and the quarterback. The nice thing for Packers fans is there's no expectations. I think they'll take 8-9 wins if Jordan Love looks good and these receivers are building something up. Maybe Joe Barry disappoints. You can get him gone, get a real coordinator in, and then 2024 could get real for this team pretty quick. But as far as 50-1 odds to win the Super Bowl, I'm not making that bet, but I would bet the division at plus 350. I think Detroit, Minnesota, Chicago, they've all got question marks of their own. So to get pretty good odds there, I think is pretty fair. If you want to bet on the Packers, that's a good price, is basically what I'm saying. So that is all we've got. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, please do hit that like button. It really helps me out. Drop a comment what you think. Where am I right? Where am I wrong? Who do you think is next in this series? Make sure you're subscribed while you're down there as well. And until next time, hope you enjoyed, and we'll see you later. Peace out.